Good morning, everyone who's joining us today. We'll wait a few minutes here while all of our participants join the session, and then we'll get started. All right, I see we have quite a few joining. So let's go ahead. We've got a lot to cover today. I want to welcome all of you to everyone who's joining our session, Creating Cyber-Aware Employees. My name is Paula Whittigand. I am the training manager for the Arizona SBDC network, and I will be your host today. And helping me in the host responsibilities is Esmeralda Estrada. She's a program coordinator also from the Arizona State Office. And let's see, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and Esmeralda is going to help us keep an eye on that. And feel free throughout the session as you have questions to enter those in the Q&A, and we'll address those as we go along. Just another note, we are recording the session and we'll be making it available up on our YouTube channel after today. So let's go ahead and get started. So some of you joining us today may be new to the SBDC, so I just want to take a couple of minutes to give a very brief overview of our services. And then at the very end of the presentation, I'll explain a little bit more of the benefits and how you can request those services should you have need or be interested in learning more about what we offer. But the SBDC, or Small Business Development Centers, provide one-on-one, no-fee, confidential business counseling. And we serve clients anywhere from, if you're just starting a business, or maybe you've started that business and it's really taken off and growing and you're feeling the challenges of that, to even those, established, small businesses that they're still sustaining, but they still have some day-to-day challenges, could use some counseling, advice services, and even maybe looking at some succession planning. So we provide a wide range of services to any of those small businesses on that spectrum. And just a couple of areas, for example, that we do provide counseling in is business planning, access to capital if you're looking for funding to start or grow that business, financial review, sales and marketing strategy. I mean, that's just a few, but many other areas. We do also in our Arizona network have expertise, some counselors with expertise in international trade and export and technology commercialization. So again, this is a no cost in addition to our counseling services, we provide no cost or low cost training programs such as the one that you're here today for. And we also have access to some tools and resources for our clients. So I'll give you a little snapshot view of what some of those tools are at the end of the program. So we're able to provide these services because we do have a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Small Business Administration. Our funding comes from the SBA, also from Maricopa Community College District, local host community colleges across the state, and the Arizona Commerce Authority. And as you see on the map there on the screen, we cover the entire state of Arizona. So no matter where you're joining us, there will be an SBDC center that can help you with your small business needs. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today. Welcome, Earl Gregorich. Earl comes to us from the South Carolina SBDC. He's the South Carolina SBDC Greenville Area Manager. He is also a co-chair for the America's SBDC Cybersecurity Task Force. And Earl brings with us today just a broad range of experience in depth in entrepreneurship, consulting with small businesses, information technology, organizational leadership, and he's also served in the U.S. Air Force. So Earl, thank you so much. We're very happy to have you here today to take us through creating this cyber-aware employee topic. So with that, I am going to stop my sharing and turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I'll get my screen going here. So should be able to see my slides at this point. So welcome everybody. Thank you for attending today. We've got a lot of material to cover, and my endeavor here is to cover the high points of the slides that you'll see here. Those will be available to you after the fact. You'll be able to download a PDF version of the slides. You'll see there's a lot of information on it. That's intentional because we like to leave these behind and give you the opportunity to dig a little deeper if you like. My email will be included, as you see there on the first slide. It'll be on the first and the last slide. So if you have additional questions after the fact, you can certainly reach out to me. But during the presentation, feel free to drop a question in the chat, and we'll do our best to make sure we get all of your questions answered today. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're going to see the logo in the top right hand side of this slide here throughout the presentation. North Star. North Star is basically the brand that we use at the ASBDC level for all small business development centers across the United States for all things cybersecurity. And the reason we brand it is we want everyone to know that everything that we teach, everything that we try to put in the hands of small business owners is based on industry standards. So this is not something that the ASBDC or the individual SBDC offices have come up with on their own. We are basing all the advice and everything that we do on the CMMC model and the NIST framework, which if you're in these circles, you know what those are. If you're not, that's probably another video that we can do. But just understand that if you're following these guidelines, some of the things we're going to be talking about today, you are putting yourself in alignment with what are considered to be best practices throughout the industries. So that in mind. The other thing that I want to point out is the materials that we cover through the Small Business Development Center networks are on cybersecurity are primarily meant for you to get a general understanding of what it means to be cybersecurity aware. We are not offering any kind of certification in any way. We are not CMMC or NIST assessors in any fashion, but we certainly, like I said, use that as a baseline for all that we do. So if you use this information, you're getting yourself very well prepared to follow a path to maybe pursue certification some other time with a third-party entity. But we're not doing that here today. We're just getting you that top-level beginners type of information. So our learning objectives for today, in a nutshell, basically, I want to touch on some things that are going to help you in your business to either become a cyber-aware employee or be a manager or owner of a business that is better equipped to create cyber-aware employees. You're going to see many different suggestions here on how you can accomplish that. We're going to talk about how do we create a safe computing environment within a business. We'll talk about the fact that the weakest link in cybersecurity is the human, and fortunately we have a lot of humans working in the workforce right now, so we need to know how to get them to think about cybersecurity. And then we're also going to talk about some of the common threats that you face as a small business, how to kind of work your way through those, and give you some guidance on how to get your employees to take these threats seriously. And then you're going to hear the word culture a lot. Cybersecurity, you'll see on here one slide that I have, it says cybersecurity is not a task, it's a way of doing business. And I hope to drive that home today in our learning objectives. So one of the first things we want to establish when we're talking with small business owners and employees is the importance of cybersecurity. You don't have to look really hard or very long to find a headline in the news or some event or possibly even a coworker or a peer of another business owner that has recently been breached or suffered a cyber attack of some sort. It's just all over the place right now. But cybersecurity is important from the standpoint of many things, but the ones that we'd like to bring forward is data breaches cost you money. If there's anything that a business owner understands more than anything else, it's that impact on the bottom line, right? So if you've got a cyber event that has impacted your business, chances are you're going to be spending money that you hadn't planned on spending. So whether it's large or small, that usually doesn't matter. It's an amount that you hadn't budgeted for. It certainly can help hurt your reputation in the marketplace, both as a competitor and an employer. So understanding how that can quickly tarnish your reputation is also a big factor. And then understanding why you are a target, why cybersecurity is important in a bigger sense, in a community sense. Small businesses are targeted because they tend to be looked at as a stepping stone. These hackers look at small businesses as being that portal that they can easily exploit to find their way into larger entities, into government agencies and the like, because they realize we don't have the time, we don't have the resources in many cases to deploy some of the more robust cybersecurity tools that are out there. So we are targeted. If you're thinking, gosh, I'm too small to have to worry about this, that is not the case. You're actually the perfect size for a hacker to be targeting. And then there's also regulatory requirements as a business, whether it's big or small. There are regulatory requirements that make cybersecurity a priority, whether you know it or not. Ignorance of the law is not a suitable defense, as it's been said before. So you need to understand the regulatory impacts on your business, whether that's you're a medical oriented business or a manufacturer of regulated materials or what it may be. You need to understand those regulations and how they impact cybersecurity. So we'd like to outline the basic cybersecurity framework. All of what you'll be hearing today is pulled from this framework, and how you work with your employees and get their general understanding of what cybersecurity awareness is should revolve around this framework. This has been put together and has been in place for years. NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, they are the ones who originally put this together. This has been refined over several years. But in general, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. That's the general steps that we look at when we're talking about making sure a business is cyber aware, making sure the employees are cyber aware. And we'll kind of touch on each of these areas as we go through today's materials. And again, I know there's a lot of information on some of these slides. You'll be able to get the PDF afterwards. As I hit the high points here, you'll be able to go into some of the details later. So what do we actually have to do to get employees to be cyber aware? Well, as I mentioned, the word culture comes up a lot. And while a business has a culture, there should also be a cyber awareness facet to that culture. One of the first things I always work with owners is the fact that they need to make sure that they are creating a culture where this is a no-fault situation. We need to incentivize the fact that people should be aware of cybersecurity and how do we protect the company against the potential attacks that are out there. And I emphasize that no-fault thing because, I'm in this business and I am not going to stand here and tell you that there's no way I can be hacked. I know for a fact that there are many, many ways that I can be tripped up, and even someone who's always on the lookout for this stuff, it can happen. So I do stress to owners, look, you can't have a situation where it's a punitive scenario if someone was to get hacked, because frankly, that next email that comes in might get you, the owner. Then what are you going to do? So make sure that you are putting in place a culture where it's okay, we're in this together, we're going to fight this battle together, and no fault. We just need to work through this if it happens, and let's have a plan. Let's be diligent and stay on top of things. We also need to identify the data that we have that we are protecting, and I'm going to talk about some specific areas that you need to look in for that. Training and testing is a big part of making sure that cybersecurity does not become a task and it actually does become part of the day-to-day operations. We'll talk about how to make that effective. You must have a hack response in place. If you're going about this thinking, okay, I'm going to put all the defense up front and I don't have to worry about what's going to happen because we'll never get hacked, that's a really, really bad idea. So while we want to prepare, we want to avoid the hack, obviously we still do need to be prepared in the event a hack does occur. And then, as with anything within a small business, if you want it to be successful, you've got to be constantly communicating with the employees, just to let them know what's going on, because cybersecurity, as in many aspects of running a business, cybersecurity changes a lot, and the threats change, and the methods for avoiding those threats, those change as well. And you need to constantly be communicating those to your employees. All right, so there's my quote again. Again, cybersecurity is not a task, it's a way of doing business. So let's talk about how we do that. So the first thing, when we're talking about culture, you need to make sure that you're pushing forward at all times. You're diligent about making sure that the tone is such that cybersecurity is a top priority. If you're not including this in regular conversation, you're, by lack of having that out there in front, you are implying that it's not as important. So you need to make sure that you're always setting the tone. Cybersecurity is important. Going back to what I said earlier, no fault atmosphere. We're not looking to punish anybody because they failed to catch that phishing email or whatever it may be. We just want to make sure that everybody understands what it is, and let's get that reported so we can defend against it if that's what's needed. All policies with regards to cybersecurity, and most business practices for that matter, if you want to have a good culture within your business, all these policies should apply top to bottom. There are no exclusions here. Everybody is subject to the same policies when it comes to cybersecurity, and that will help everybody adopt these much more easily. And then this should begin right at onboarding and go clear through with annual reviews all the way to the exit interview. Cybersecurity should be one of those items that you go through at each of those touch points with employees. When you onboard them, you want to set the bar, you want to make sure that the policies are understood. On an annual basis, at a minimum, you want to make sure that they're signing off on the current policies within the business with regards to cyber and digital actions within the company. And then on the exit strategy, you want to make sure that you are, during that exit interview, you are making sure that you are covering those things that you need, recovering those things that you need to recover, and making those adjustments within the business to protect it in the event somebody does leave the company. So it is start to finish and always a priority. So when we're talking about the atmosphere that we need to create in order for cybersecurity awareness to be rampant throughout our business, we want to make sure that everybody, again, understands we're all in the same team. We're all fighting the same battle. Some of us aren't going to get this right. Some of us are going to get tripped up. But the fact of the matter is, on the other side of that, we're all going to learn something from this. We hope that lesson is not too costly. We certainly hope that lesson is not fatal to the business. But we all want to make sure that whatever has occurred, everybody learns from that, and we don't allow that to occur again. We also want to make sure that we're setting the expectations, and we're making sure that's a priority. But while that's a good thing, we want to make sure that those employees are getting regular reminders, and that they're getting tips, they're getting newsletters, they're getting things that on a fairly regular basis are reminding them, hey, we're watching, we're doing this, we're staying diligent, we hope you are too. And then those policies and procedures, making sure that those are clearly communicated. very much encourage business owners to put these in writing. When social media became a big part of everyday life, you know, businesses were scrambling to figure out, oh, how do I make a policy such that my employee doesn't share something inappropriate on a social media platform about my business, or doesn't accidentally trip up and share some detail maybe that I didn't want my competition to pick up on LinkedIn or Facebook. We had to come up with those policies. We put those in writing, put them in front of the personnel so that they could sign off on that, saying they understood that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a leg to stand on if we needed to take action for someone who went contrary to the policy. Very same process now with cybersecurity. You're going to be putting some protections in place. You're going to be doing some things that are a little different now than you used to. You need to make sure that those policies are in writing, they're clear, and people have had the opportunity to internalize that and ask questions. And I'll give you an example of what that's like here. So this is just a quick example of what maybe a passphrase policy might look like. And it doesn't have to be all graphically fancy like this or anything, but if you were to outline a example policy on passphrases, and notice I'm calling them passphrases, not passwords. Passwords are too short. Passphrases typically involve multiple words. That makes them longer and much more complex and more difficult for hackers to figure out. But just simply laying out the steps or the minimum requirements that your company has for an employee on any policy, this example being passphrases, putting it in simple terms. This is what we expect. These are the steps you need to take. This is what things need to look like. This is the type of information that we expect you to know and understand. Putting it out there in plain and simple terms is best. And then, of course, when you're done laying out the policy, it's always good to follow it up with the why. It's what, you know, if you tell someone you need to do this way, this manner, you need to perform these specific steps. Well, they can do that, and they may be willing to do that for a short period of time and possibly lose interest. But if you tell them the why, if you give them the reasoning behind why we are doing it this way, it tends to have a greater impact. It tends to have some staying power. So I like to point out to my business owners, I say, look, you know, here's your policy, but where's your why? Why are you asking them to do it this way? Why did we do it this way yesterday and now we're doing it that way tomorrow? If you explain that, it makes it much easier for people to adapt and take on these new responsibilities. Especially, you know, this is going to involve change, and a lot of folks don't like change. So giving them the why might make that an easier ask of your employees. So, and just a side note, if that graphic right there doesn't get your attention, it should. Just think about one of your passwords and compare it to one of those columns there. Count out the number of digits you have in your passphrase or your passwords and think about how you do it. It's amazing how quickly we can crack a password these days. So once we've kind of got the policies in place, we've got an atmosphere established, so we've put this culture in front of everybody that we want them to participate in. One of the next things that we need to think about is, okay, what exactly are we protecting? We need to make sure that folks know not only how and why they're protecting it, but what are we protecting? So that's what we're going to talk about next. So each business is going to be unique. Every business owner can look at their business and say, well, what's critically important here? If I did not have access to fill in the blank today or tomorrow, would my business stop? Would my business start to lose money? Would I have a reputation problem? Would I lose value in that business? And whatever goes in that blank is certainly top of the list. Now, one could say, okay, everything in this business is important. I need to protect it all. And that's true to some degree, but there are certain things that are absolutely critical. If you can't pay your employees, that's a really bad thing. If you're a government contractor and some critical information from that contract that you have taken on with the government gets stolen, that's a really bad thing. So any of those types of information are what we're talking about here. You need to prioritize what is absolutely important, what is very important, what's kind of important, and start laying out your strategy that way. So I've just listed some of the primaries here. Customer data, obviously from a competitive standpoint, you don't want your customer data falling into the wrong hands. And certainly if that customer data is inclusive of social security numbers or credit card numbers, even name, address, and phone number, that can be very damaging from a reputation standpoint. Not a lot of customers are going to want to come knocking on your door if it's been known that you've been hacked. So you want to make sure that you're protecting that. Intellectual property, that goes to that value of the business. Again, business owners understand that this cybersecurity is typically an expense line item. It's going to cost them something. So why do they spend time on it? Well, it's to protect the bottom line value of the business. If they want to sell this business in the future, they need to protect that intellectual property. And one of the things they need to protect it from is cyber attacks. So intellectual property is another thing that we really focus on from the standpoint of making sure employees know what they are protecting. Employee data. If an employee is working for the company and they know the company obviously has some very, very personal information on them in their employee records, their bank account numbers, all of these things are on file right now with typical HR companies. That in and of itself should be plenty of incentive to get an employee to say, look, I need to protect the gates here, because if I let the wrong thing in, they could walk off with all my banking information. So employee data extremely important as well, and usually a very good tool to get the employee's attention that this is a good reason why you need to protect this. And then, as I mentioned, the regulatory requirements. If you are in the medical field, then you are regulated to handle medical records in a certain way. If you have a point of sale, credit card processing operation in your business, that is highly regulated on how you handle that data. And controlled unclassified information typically is what we're talking about if you're a government contracting company. All of that type of data is regulated. You must protect it. You must have certain safeguards in place. And if you were to get hacked, you must have a certain reporting process in place for that as well. So if you think you fall into that category, or you're not quite sure you fall into that category, you need to reach out to your local SBDC office and talk with us, because that's something, again, that you can't plead ignorance on that. If you've got it, you are responsible for it, whether or not you realize it or not. So this slide I like because it kind of speaks to the times. Being persistent about our protection involves a lot of moving parts. These days, we're carrying around in our pocket on our cell phone access to all kinds of information. And that employee that we have working for us needs to have an understanding of what are the rules of engagement, basically, on all of these different touch points and platforms. So obviously the internal storage, those things we keep within the business, that is a little bit easier to say, hey, look, that's ours, that's the business's data, and therefore it needs to be protected, and that is off limits to any kind of personal access or any kind of external outreach that you might do, say on social media or something like that. That's pretty easy for us to get an employee to understand that this is business, this is personal, they stay separate. But how the interaction goes or where the boundary is drawn can be a little fuzzy for some employees versus others. So that item right there in the center of the slide, confidentiality. This is something I would encourage you to specifically define with your employees. What does this mean? Good, bad, or indifferent, no matter, depending upon which side of this argument you want to fall, we share everything these days, and you don't want anything from your internal storage or your cloud storage or even pictures maybe of the internal workings of your operations. You don't want that kind of stuff to show up on Facebook, LinkedIn, some of the other social media platforms. So you have to define what is confidentiality. What are the elements we're talking about here? This is not just, hey, you know, I was just talking with friends, and nobody else will know. If it's online, it's accessible to the world. So you need to make sure that people understand what your expectations, what your definition of confidentiality is, and that really should be part of your policies. But knowing how people are accessing information, how they're interacting with your business versus some of their normal day-to-day operations. And I know this is touchy because you can't really dictate how somebody conducts themselves on social media, but you do have to set some standards. You do have to set some boundaries, as I said. Let them know that, okay, if you've got a mobile device, this is the rules for using that mobile device in our business. It could be something as simple as, look, that's distracting and we do not want it taking away from the customer interaction. That's one aspect of how we handle mobile devices. We also don't want you taking pictures of the manufacturing floor when you're inside. So that's another aspect. That's more of a security thing rather than a service thing. But all of these things wrapped up into your policies will help clarify this such that an employee understands, wow, this company takes this seriously. This is a priority for them. And there, that big one down there in the bottom right-hand corner, that email management, most all of the attacks that we typically see coming upon small business are coming in through that email inbox. So you need to spend some extra time with your employees establishing how we conduct ourselves via email. What do we take inbound? How do we conduct email conversations outbound? What do we look for when emails come in? How do we distribute or redistribute email content as it arrives? These types of things should be communicated to all employees on a fairly regular basis so they don't forget how to conduct themselves and how to manage that email aspect of business. Because that is probably, like I said, one of the most popular ways that hackers will find their way into your business. So the next thing we're going to talk about is training. We've established the culture, we've put together the policies, we've told everybody what it is that we need to protect. So now let's teach them how to actually do that. So if we're going to spend some time and resources and possibly even some money on training our employees, we want to make sure this training is impactful, right? It needs some staying power. It needs to support that culture and support that policy that we have in place. So now we're talking about, how do we go about this? So first and foremost, let's be consistent. I know sometimes that's challenging with this topic because today we're telling you to do it this way, and tomorrow the hackers change the rules, and now we got to tell you to do it a different way. But if you maintain a clear path to just basic cyber awareness, that use that as your base, that will help with that consistency thing. As far as how you communicate training, you should think about how your employees interact with the technology now and use that to your favor. Leverage the fact that most employees get a 2 to 5 minute video. They have that at least that long of an attention span. that YouTube mentality, that email snippet mentality. Use that, leverage that in such a way that your content follows that. If you say, okay, next Wednesday morning, we're all going to go in the conference room, we're going to sit down for 2 hours, and we're going to talk about cybersecurity. Well, they've already tuned out. It's not even Wednesday yet. They're not looking forward to that event. But if you can incorporate just something that shows up in the email box every week or every couple of days, it says, hey, guess what? We found this, and here's what we need to do about it. 2 minutes long, maybe in a video format. Perfect. That they get, that they're used to. And if you do it right, they may actually even look forward to it. I'll give you an example of that later on in the presentation here. So put training in front of them in a format that they understand, that they can actually interact with. And then consider making the most important of the important training, make that mandatory. There should not be oh yeah, I missed that video, or yeah, I just decided that I had other things that were of greater importance, so I didn't do it. You need to make this mandatory, so therefore you have to have some way of tracking who's taken this and who hasn't. And fortunately, this is fairly easy to do these days. There are plenty of resources out there that can offer training in that 2 to 5 minute video format that is on basically autopilot, that you can put in front of employees, and you will be able to get a report to see who took it and who didn't. So I can give you some resources on that again towards the end of the video today. So that was formal training. What are some of the things we also need to implement? Well, as was mentioned in my bio, I was in the military, not very long, but long enough to be indoctrinated with how we do business as a military entity. And one of the things that gets drilled into you if you spend any time in the military is you should always be aware of your surroundings. So while we have formal training and we're teaching about things like phishing and ransomware and some things specific, there should always be that general sense of being aware of our surroundings. What's not right today? Is there something new that has occurred that hasn't happened before? Is there an employee or maybe a vendor that's showing up at a regular time and maybe going into an area of the business that we normally don't see people? Being aware of some of those small things can be just enough to determine, well, we may have a problem here. We may have something going on that otherwise we would not have been aware of. So create a situation where we don't want people looking over each other's shoulders and creating paranoia here, but we do want people to take note of, well, what's different? Has something happened today? Did your machine not react like it should have? Is that software package that you had on there yesterday not there today? Is there a new icon on your desktop that wasn't there before? If those kinds of things are what we're looking for, we need to train people to be aware of that. And then,
hey, Earl, this
yes.
is Paula. We actually have two related to training in our Q&A. So one is, how do I get training for this? And then, is there any software that I can get for training if I want to buy? And I think you just mentioned that you're going to potentially share some resources here at the end of the session.
I am. There's actually 3 resources at the end of the slide deck that I'll point out. There's one specifically related to what I just mentioned, that 2 to 5 minute video format. They focus specifically on that email gateway, and they send test emails out to your employees, and that gives you the opportunity to set up a specific test. It's just a quick example. They'll send out Starbucks gift cards to all of your employees, the entire staff, if you like. And those who fall for that, they get hooked, as it's called, and they click on the link to get their free Starbucks gift card, and it comes up and says, "You've been hooked. We find that you've clicked on that phishing email, and here's what you should have looked for." And it gives them this funny, entertaining video on, okay, you like Starbucks, and here's what you should have seen in that email that should have told you this wasn't Starbucks and this was not your business. So it's good. It's a good resource, and I'll point out who that is at the end. You said you had another question?
The other was asking me about training. Where can we get training? So I think you've addressed it.
Okay. All right. Thanks for those. Keep those questions coming. All right. So if we're training and we've got our specific focus training, and we've got our general awareness training. Now we have to look at what are we training against? What are the subject matters, the topics of that training? So one of them can be common threats, and that common threat typically for small business falls into that malware category. Malware being software that's been loaded on a machine to cause some sort of damage or chaos. And they come in multiple forms, but typically we classify them as viruses, spyware, or Trojan horses. Viruses you're probably pretty familiar with. They're meant specifically to do harm to a machine or a system. Spyware usually sits in the background, kind of keeps an eye on what's going on, maybe copies down some of the information that's coming and going across the network so that it can be used against that business or as access to that business, or maybe a vendor or a supplier. And then Trojan horses, those typically, that's a software that is loaded on a system that at some point in the future will be activated. And that can be both as an internal attack or possibly to use your systems for an external attack on some other system. So all of these are very common. And for most small business owners, they don't have an idea that that's even going on their systems. So this gets a little bit more technical to detect these kinds of things, but first and foremost, have some basic antivirus and malware protection software on your systems, folks. Teach your employees what to look for. Make sure, and when they log onto the system every morning, they look down and they make sure that they've got the green check box, or they've got the thumbs up sign, or whatever your software uses to communicate that things are good, they can continue. That's what you want. So educating an employee of what is in place and how to determine, is it a green light or a red light day to go forward. That's the key there. And then you want to test them, kind of like I just described with that example with Starbucks email going out. You want to have various testing apparatus in place, and this can take many different forms. But make sure when you're testing folks, you're testing them using scenarios that they come across day in and day out. It does you no good to teach them how to determine if a point of sale system has been breached if they never process a credit card and they never run that frontline register. So make sure, if you're in consultancy type of a business, test your employees in that atmosphere. If you're in a retail business, test them in that atmosphere, and so on. Use the types of data that you are trying to protect and say, okay, we just received this kind of information in. Is that data that we protect? Yes or no? If it is data that we protect, what is our first course of action in recording that data into our systems? Those kinds of things get them not only to think about the security aspect of it, but also from the standpoint of operations. How should I be handling this? So you're kind of getting, double bang for the buck there, because you're not only testing cybersecurity, but you're also testing knowledge of how they go about their daily operations. So run those tests on a regular basis. But I want to also expand from the employee part here to also another thing, which is some of our systems. We want to test our software, we want to test our backups as well. Software should be tested to make sure that it is staying up to date with its latest versions and patches. So you want to run a test on those periodically, and that could just be simply going in and taking a look at the about link on that software to see if it's got the latest version on it. You can also look at that from the standpoint of when's the last time we took a backup, and did we ever test one of those backups to see if we can actually restore something from it. So make sure it's not only just the people, but some of the hardware and software that you're doing as well. And you see there's a link there to a test that is put out by Google, kind of represented there on the screen, that you can do for phishing, that you can help educate your employees on the practice of phishing. All right, so unfortunately, like I said, all the cultural things that we put in place, the policies we have everybody sign, the training that we do, you still can get hacked. I sat in a webinar last week, and the title of the webinar was Anatomy of a Hack. And it went through step by step all of the things that a business did to avoid being hacked, and then what happened when they got hacked, and also what the response to that hack was. And it was pretty amazing. I mean, this company, it wasn't Fort Knox, but it certainly had gone many, many steps beyond what most of our small businesses have done, or even really in most cases have the ability to do, and they still got hacked. So that's why I say, be diligent, do what you should do, get your employees to buy into this and support it, but also prepare on the other end that when and if it should occur, you are prepared to respond. So if you come in one morning and this is what you see on the screen, that's not, you've just changed your schedule for probably at least the next week. This is what a typical ransomware notice might look like. Somebody has allowed this through the gateway. It has taken over your systems, and this is all you'll be able to get out of your computer until you take the actions being requested by the hacker on the other side. So yeah, you can imagine what people feel like when that happens. And now you're faced with, what do I do next? And that's really kind of what we're talking about at this stage. What do I do when this happens? So first and foremost, you want to focus on minimizing that impact. So again, you should have already put in place with your employees a plan of response. Everybody knows at that point what they do. There's no question about what is the next step. And unfortunately, time does matter in this. The longer you allow this to reside on a system, the deeper it gets, the more entrenched it becomes, the more difficult it is to recover. So there is some timeliness involved with this. So you can't afford to say, okay, we got this red thing on the screen. Here's what we need to do. I'm going to train you right now. That's probably not the position you want to be in. So that's why we have to do all this ahead of time. So focusing on minimizing the impact, that's what we want to look at first. Finding fault in this particular situation is not the highest priority. We don't want to find the person to point the finger at. What we want to do is we want to get to the point where we understand how this happened. Where did this malware come in? Where did it reside? What software should have been updated? All of these types of things have to be figured out, because obviously we don't want this to happen again. So it's natural. Somebody said, well, who did it? What email did that come in on? Who clicked on that link? That's natural, but that is not going to solve the problem. What solves the problem is tracking down what is the cause, and let's plug that hole so this can be stopped and we don't have to wrangle with this again. This will give you an opportunity to stress, the need for that diligence again. And you can do this by communicating with the employees what's going on with the recovery. Now, obviously, if this involves some sensitive information, maybe some sensitive data, you don't want to divulge that kind of stuff, but you do want to keep people in the loop as to okay, here's what we found, here's what we're doing to correct it, here's the estimated timeline for us to be back online. Don't worry, everybody's still going to get paid this Friday. Those kinds of things. You think about what is priority with the employee. In the case of that anatomy of the hack, the business that was hacked, they basically just sent everybody home and said, look, we'll call you when you can come back. And that was a week later that they got to bring their employees back. It was estimated that was a $4.5 million hit for that company. So needless to say, every employee in that situation was on edge. Even if they had absolutely nothing to do with the cyber event, they were still on edge because they got to be thinking, gosh, is the company going to survive? Am I going to have a job next week? Am I going to get paid this week? Well, where's my data? Did they get my banking information? And all this is going through your employees' heads at this point. You have to be communicating them as best you can on what's going on. And no matter how large or small the event is, you want to make sure that everybody understands what occurred, how we were able to rectify the situation, and what steps we're doing and taking forward as we get beyond this. So make sure you communicate so you don't get that red box again. So just some things with regards to response and recovery. You want to make sure that you have a plan to put the pieces back together. What is the absolute minimum? What are our priorities? We've got to get HR online first. We got to get customer billing online second, and operations are third, or whatever prioritization works right for your business. You need to know that, and the employees need to know that before a hack might occur. You also need to understand, okay, how am I going to manage this from a PR standpoint? My brand is now taking a hit. We've been hacked. The world is going to know very shortly. And we need a plan to be able to mitigate any of those impacts that we're going to see on that. So you may simply hire a PR professional to handle this for you, or you may figure out on your own how you plan on using some internal resources that you have. If you have someone that's really good on the inside that can speak to the outside world in the event of a situation like this. And then, of course, the legal responsibilities. As I said earlier, if you're dealing in regulated materials, you will have a legal responsibility. And every state has a reporting process in the event of a breach. So if you're not for sure what Arizona's policy is, you need to look that up. And again, the SBDC can help you track that down, so you know what legally you have to do in the event of a breach. The number one thing you can do in the event of a breach is recover from using a backup. And so if you do not have a backup policy, you want to get that implemented as soon as possible. Just briefly, a really good backup policy is a 3-2-1 approach. You have one primary backup and 2 copies of that backup. So that's 3 backups. Then you have those 3 backups saved up on 2 media types. So one's cloud storage, one's an external hard drive that's kept in the safety deposit box, whatever. So 2 different backup sources, and then one being one of those copies should be kept off-site. So 3-2-1 process is a very common and tried and true method for backups. Everybody should know that backups are being done, and generally speaking, how that impacts their flow of data in their workspace. I think I've covered this one pretty well. Everybody needs to understand what the response is to a hack and who's involved with that, and prioritize. Who is it that is going to be best suited to come in and help clean up the mess after the fact. Really, that's what we're talking about, and then communicate and learn from those mistakes that were made that got us to where we are. So having a good team in place is a definite need. The last item here, communication. I think I've talked about this considerably. Basically, we just want to make sure that you are communicating on a regular basis with the employees. Make sure that they understand what's coming, what's going in all situations, whether that's day to day or in a crisis mode. Make sure you're always communicating with the employee, and make sure that you have an internal method of communicating and an external method of communicating, because you're going to have two different audiences here. And you don't want your employees running around talking to the media, posting things on social media in the event of a hack. They are not the ones you want answering the questions. So that needs to be part of how you set up your systems and processes internally for your employees as well. So as I mentioned, some resources here in closing. Certainly you can reach out to the SBDC network. They're in Arizona. We have some nationwide experts as well that are accessible. That's how I got here today. And we also do recommend that you check out the NIST Cybersecurity framework. If you just Google that terminology and go to the NIST website, NIST, that will get you to the baseline of all of this. The last three bullets on there, stay safe online, know before, and hook security, are the three sources that you can go to get a lot of this training. And it'll come in the form of video, webinars, downloadable one-pagers. And then Hook Security is the one that produces those 2 to 5 minute videos on inbound email phishing tests and the like. So do look each of those up and use them to the best fit for your business. And there's my email if you have questions after the fact. What do we have coming in from the chat room? I see that number ticking up there.
So Earl, just real quick, someone had asked, I don't have any communication with Starbucks. How do I get that software for Starbucks? You talked about that testing software.
So that actually is the Hook Security bullet that was there at the end. And they will use any brand that they have access to. And I think they've got something like 75 different brands that they have been given the thumbs up. They have the okay to use them. And so you pick the one you think that would leave your employees the most vulnerable and test them using that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Earl. An hour goes very quickly. Lots of really good information. I love that chart that shows the data points. It's amazing how one character changes from, what was it, 2 days to 5 months. So that was an eye opener. So, Earl covered a lot of things. So there's going to be, this is a pretty in-depth topic, right? A very high level of overview. So you're probably wondering, where do I go next? It can be very overwhelming. But, Earl shared some resources there. The SBDC, this is something we can help you with. As Earl was talking about early on, building a culture, policies and procedures, passwords. Those are things that, SBDC counselors can kind of guide you through. Some of that culture thing is just in general. This just adds another layer to how you're building your culture. So if you're interested in finding out more about or need some help from SBDC counselors, I put the link on the screen. No matter where you're at in Arizona, if you go to that link, you'll be able to locate where you are, and then it'll point you to that website and request for counseling from that particular center closest to you. But we do have many resources that we can share with you on this topic, as well as just in general. We didn't get a chance to talk about cyber insurance, but that's something even, right, Earl? I mean, we're coming up to, we're almost coming up to the second half of the year where we start thinking and planning for next year and budgeting for your business. That's something else that potentially a future topic for one of our cyber sessions coming up in the future. Just very quickly, I know we're at the top of the hour here. If you are a client, you have access to many of these tools, no fee, great things to complement your counseling and to help you with business development. And of course, we have a couple more sessions coming up. Build and leverage credit to get financing to grow your business. We've got Jerry Detweiler from now.com joining us on July 13th. And then our cybersecurity series continues in August, implementing secure passwords. So Earl was talking about that. That's another kind of a first step to kind of start heading down this track of protecting your company and cybersecurity. So keep an eye on our calendar. We'll get those dates finalized here within the next few days. And you can register for that session just like you did for the cybersecurity session. And then Esmeralda, I'll let you close us out for the session today.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Earl, for your presentation. You'll be receiving an evaluation after this webinar, so it'll be within 24 to 48 hours that you'll receive it. If you could please leave us a feedback, some feedback, we'd really appreciate it. And you'll also be receiving the PDF to this presentation along with the recording of this video. But thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you again, Earl. Bye now.